As I've said in the past, I want to thank returning G4G attendees for coming, and also welcome new attendees for coming for your first time, because like all of you, if it wasn't for Martin Gardner, I wouldn't be here today. I never get tired of that one. So I'm going to, I've tried to integrate some new anecdotes in addition to some of the ones I've selected from the last couple times, just to refresh our memory. As I always say, when I do these sort of presentations, I go into flow and I lose all concept of time. So hopefully I'm going to get a 20-minute warning, and at 25, I definitely want to stop to try to answer some questions that some of you might have. And up till the last moment, a couple things I want to do. I want to make a change. 2 years ago, I mistakenly attributed to Dad learning to read by looking over the shoulder of my grandmother when she was reading the Alice in Wonderland. It actually was The Wizard of Oz. My brother Tom watched the video and pointed out that to me. So I think it was because we were talking about Alice and the new version that I just jumped into the spirit. Now, an answer to Stuart Coffin's question, did Dad have an interest in poetry and prose and verse? And that is absolutely. Because I think 2 years ago, Dana Richards presented on some of Dad's work in the area of children's literature. Dad wrote, edited, did multiple things for a magazine called Humpty Dumpty. And in Humpty Dumpty, he wrote a story and often had a poem for children. And I actually call them morals for children. And I'm actually trying to republish this book that he wrote, which was a compilation, which was called Never Make Fun of a Turtle, My Son. And looking for an illustrator. So if anyone's an illustrator, come see me. But on to what's it like, some anecdotes for being the son of the most skeptical man in the world. And with that, I would say probably immediately, I am a skeptic. I believe in critical thinking, and of all the gifts that growing up with Dad that he was able to give me, I think is that perspective. So I'm going to start by just some anecdotes and some things about what I recollect growing up in the house on 10 Euclid Avenue. And I'm using that as kind of my home base right now to just talk about things that occurred during probably the first 18 years of my life. So one of the first things that I just recently found out is at the house at 10 Euclid, there is actually now a closing provenance. And what is happening is when the house is sold, the owners are presenting to the new people coming in, and there have only been 3 or 4, a copy of the Wikipedia page about Dad and something called the Gardner file. Now, I didn't learn about this until maybe just a few months prior, because I found out who was living in the house, and I sent an email because I wanted to get a couple pictures to tell a story, and he told me about this. So here is the house on 10 Euclid Avenue, and Dad's office essentially, whoops, I think there was something I was going to point like that. That third floor where you see those little eaves or whatever they're called, dormers, that entire floor was Dad's office. And if you visited Dad, you would remember that on one side was his office, and then in the 2 dormers on the both end sides were bookshelves. And there was another room that also had bookshelves that he called the library. And it's hard to see, but this is a copy of a 19-page document that Dad put together for the person who was moving into the house that, among other things, goes over what are some of the local area restaurants. What are the good places? What are the bad? Here's where we use this one garage for gas and for repair. Where the screens are, a story about the gas leak that was at the house, so we had to go to propane for the kitchen. All of these things, and I just find it interesting that gets handed down. And inside, among other things, was, for where the screens go, Dad did sketches of the floors of the house. So you can see here, we've got the second and the third floor, and the third floor was Dad's office, of course. And I just found this really, oh, here's his office. So you see office, the storage room, which was likely where some occasional puzzles went, or other items, or things that he was working on or he didn't need right away, he'd put in there, and the library. So that's kind of how the house looked at. Now, you know, just as a memory, we had a garage. And it was a garage that was designed when our house was originally built, which at whatever point, it was a relatively small garage. And I recollect that we had a Dodge Dart, which was a relatively large car. So it was always a challenge when the car was coming in to get put in the garage for the evening, exactly how far you had to go back so the garage door would not hit the rear end of the car without ramming in to the concrete wall. And there was not much room at all. So what was Dad's solution? Well, what he did was he took an old mattress and he put it up against the wall, and whenever we'd come in, he would turn on the lights, and then he'd slowly creep until the lights touched the mattress, and you could not see the lights anymore. So that was Dad's solution for how he would get into the garage. Thank you for John Doherty, who sent this information to me about that. This is another one of the most interesting things that I remember finding going through Dad's files. I don't know how, are we able to read this? Yeah, if we can pop that up. This was a form letter. Dad took one day out of the week that he devoted entirely to his correspondence. I don't remember which one. I think it was Thursday, but I'm not sure. But it would have been Wednesday or Thursday because I know Dad would want to get it in the mail for the weekend. And it reads, Martin Gardner regrets that it is impossible for him to, and I'm not going to read the whole thing, but I particularly like give lectures or appear on radio or TV shows, attend cocktail parties, 6, make trips to Manhattan except under extreme provocation. And the last one is put the reader in touch with Dr. Matrix. And if you've read his biography, of course, that's how he got to meet Salvador Dali, who wanted to meet Dr. Matrix through Dad. So, you know, kind of as just a quick reflection, I think I would say that one of the characteristics of Dad is what I'm doing the analogy to. Dad was the Grand Central Station. I remember in his office there would be puzzles, there would be magic tricks, but I have no idea how many actually came through his house. Because a puzzle would be there one day, or who knows how many came through, but he would never keep them. He would entertain himself with it, he would study up, he would learn the unique characteristics of that puzzle, but then what he was very gracious to do is when someone else came through, he would actually introduce them to that puzzle, And if they seemed so uniquely interested, he would give them that puzzle. So in a lot of ways, puzzles came in and out of the house. And I think it was Douglas Hofstadter in his first column when he took over Dad's Scientific American column. He said, you would have expected to see puzzles and things all throughout the house. But he said it was actually very sparse. So any idea that Dad was the puzzle man that might have been out in the field, you did not necessarily see that through observation. But I distinctly remember one of the other things growing up is Dad taking me to the Whispering Gallery, which he was enthralled in Grand Central Station. Those of you who don't know about it, you can Google it. It is an area near the Oyster Bar in Grand Central that acoustically you can get into one corner, turn your back, the other person can get into the other corner, and it's some 575 feet away. You can carry on a regular conversation because the acoustics are is that your voice pops up over and comes down. And so Dad would often take me there as I was growing up so I could play with it. And he tells a story supposedly that James the Amazing Randi used to do a joke where he would take an empty wallet and put it in one corner and be in the other. And when someone would come by to pick it up, Randy would say, "Drop that wallet." And people would, go, where is that coming from? So that's kind of the whimsical side. I am certain, or I like to think, that probably through the house at 10 Euclid, there were Pulitzer Prize winners, Nobel laureates, Fields Medal winners who might have come. But of course, my recollections are 10 through the age of 18. I went off to college and kind of never came back. So I don't have much recollection of specific individuals coming. I know Conway will tell a story about his first meeting with Dad, which might have been when we lived in Dobbs Ferry on Bel Air Drive, that at one point Dad had to stop and say, "You just stay here, I have to go pick up Jimmy." So I know that John Conway was there, but I don't have a real solid memory. But the one person I do have a very solid memory is Pete Hine. And Pete Hine came on 2 different occasions and stayed at our house for 3 or 4 days while he and Dad were talking and Pete was doing some sort of business in town. And I distinctly remember him coming with some super eggs for my brother and I to play with, as well as, for whatever reason, skateboards had just come out at that time. And he was enthralled because they didn't have those in Denmark. So he was out on the street trying skateboards. And he brought us some Danish toys and other things. So I remember him. And he has kind of put a mark because he also introduced me and gave me a couple copies of his Grooks. And so over the year, and you may recognize that often in some of Dad's essays, he would start by statements or quotes of individuals or poems or other things. And on a number of occasions, he used some of Pete Hine's Grooks. So for example, TTT, which you can read, is a Grook that I often used at some point when some of my doctoral students were struggling to get through with their classes and doing their dissertations, and I would just say, read this and remember TTT, things take time. Now, sometime in 1964, for whatever reason, my grandmother, for the reason that I know, became very uncomfortable in a moment of notability related to Dad. And I'm going to share with you 2 until now known books by Martin Gardner that I'm going to predict are not even in Dana Richards' bibliography. So what happened is Martin Gardner actually appeared on one of the local Tulsa stations to talk about one or two of his books, and people started calling my grandmother saying, "Oh, I saw your son, the author, the other day on television. He's so handsome, blah, 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 blah." These were the books. So you will note that they are not by Martin Gardner, but they are by Martin A. Gardner. And so my grandmother was extremely uncomfortable because people were thinking that her son was the author of these books rather than Scientific American or other things. Now, I'm also we're going to do a final Jeopardy, not the final of my talk, but another thing about Martin, about Dad, is this. While sometimes inaccurately attributed to being created in Afghanistan, this item was often worn by Martin Gardner. Does anyone know? What is what? What? Ah, very good. What is a Mobius strip? And in fact, it's actually in silver. It looks gold. Dad's wedding ring was a Mobius strip. And if you would actually like to see it, the quick version is I was having some hand surgery. They didn't tell me to take my wedding ring off. They had to cut it off. So I used it as an opportunity to melt it back down. And I have a replica in gold of Dad's Mobius band. It's an exact replica. If you'd like to see it, I'm happy to share that with you. Martin Gardner's art collection, a quick anecdote. This is not by me, but the whimsical side of Dad, at one point apparently, he took one of my finger paintings and had it framed when I was in preschool. And he had it near his office, and people would go by, and they'd pause, and they'd say, "Oh, that's a very interesting piece of art." And Dad would say, "Yes, it was done by a family member, but I really can't share much more about that." So that was one of the pieces of art. And then, of course, there is this. Next to the Mobius strip ring, this is the most important piece of art from our family that I attribute to Dad, which was Circle Limit. Steve, which one is this? 3. Circle Limit 3, that Dad corresponded with M.C. Escher prior to doing his column that introduced Escher to the United States in Scientific American. And the story goes essentially that the art editor at Scientific American was not very pleased either. It was more expensive to do color reproductions, or I think the cover had a different Escher, and color was more expensive, and the art director did not think this was art and asked Dad, how much did you pay for it? And I'll reveal the sum in another second or two. And he essentially said, "Yeah, you paid too much." So between last time and this, I actually contacted the Escher Foundation, Escher.com, and I found out this. They have the records. Dad bought this in April of 1961 and paid 150 Dutch guilders for it, which is approximately $55 at that time. If you calculate today, it would have been buying it in today's dollars for $466. Not a bad deal for Dad. So, in fact, we can laugh at that other fellow. So here was Dad's typical routine. And I remember this distinctly because he did it during the week and on the weekends. Breakfast with the New York Times. Upstairs right after breakfast to work. He'd come down at roughly 1 o'clock, have lunch. My mom would make it for him for 30 minutes. He'd go back upstairs to work. 4 o'clock sharp was cocktail time. When he'd also do the afternoon paper's cryptogram. I think it was the Herald Statesman or the Herald Tribune. And supposedly I heard Dad say one time he tried to get just the page for the cryptogram delivered, because that's all he did in that afternoon paper. And he sent, of course, Dad would not call, he would send a letter. And what happened was he got a call back from the managing editor who recognized who he was and gracefully let Dad down that they could not do that. We'd have dinner about 5:30, 6. He'd go upstairs for additional work, and then he'd be in bed at about 8:30, where he would have additional reading material, and he'd read and edit through the evening. Now, in general, what would happen if you were in Dad's office? And this, I'm kind of generalizing across 10 Euclid, Hendersonville, and when he was also living in Norman. First, Dad's use of technology in his office. These were Dad's examples of word processing. Rubber cement, and then a pair of scissors. So what Dad would do is he would type out whatever he was working on. He might hand correct it, and if there was a significant editing change, he would retype the paragraph, cut it out, and paste it over the original piece of paper. And that's how he did it. This was Dad's telecommunications. He never, ever used anything other than a rotary phone, which later on in the last 10 years of his life he found very annoying, because he'd call information for something and they would say, press 1 if you want to talk to so-and-so, press 2 if you want to do that, and it would not work for him. And this was Dad's calculator. I fondly remember coming up and Dad would be balancing his checkbook using an abacus. Items near, miscellaneous items often on or near his desk. And for whatever reason, Pete Hines Soma Cube. The Amazing Hologram, are you familiar with that? I've got a quick video, and of course there's a reason why. This was an item that you'd come in and you would see this item resting on top when in fact it's actually, and it's done by mirrors. Another item that I remember was the floating hourglass, which he kept, and I think this is starts in about 10 seconds. So you have this hourglass inside water, and everything's falling into the bottom, and then suddenly it starts rising. And it's simple solution, once you know, based on physics and friction. Bill Ritchie, I think, did this for some previous Gardner gatherings. That was on his wall. This was another item on his wall. This is a photo of Einstein that was taken by the photographer and magician Charlie Reynolds. And that was the day that Einstein became a citizen. And Reynolds said what was very interesting, and Einstein, when he got up, he noticed Einstein was wearing no socks. And that's always been in there. What were in his closet? Any award that Dad got was not on the wall. It was in his closet because awards were not important to him. I'm going to zip through because I only have about 5 more minutes, you're saying? Are we about 5? Okay, so just some quick picture. He loved P.T. Barnum. He loved gaffs and things because when he was in Cooperstown, when we went, he was working on his annotated Casey at Bat. He took me to see the Cardiff Giant. So with that, and predicting the millionth edition of Pi. And I guess I'm going to stop at his Scientific American column, which essentially, though, I came back from college and there were different stacks. And there was one stack for people who absolutely loved it, another stack for people who took it seriously, and the biggest stack, I think, was people who thought that he needed to be fired for bamboozling them over that. So I am gonna stop now, and if you have any questions or anything that I might be able to answer. And I'll just keep on flipping. Oh, yeah, sorry, I'm out of time.
Thank you.
Yeah. So, questions?
Did your dad ever
I don't know. There might have been an area where he put a false door, but I may not be sure. Oh, by the way, I'm getting a low time on my Apple Watch. It's running out of batteries. Had to do that. One of the things he always kept in his pocket was a watch winder. Another question. Oh, come on, I have to have some other questions. Oh, at 4 o'clock, the great question. It was either a dry martini with a lemon twist, or a Manhattan or an old-fashioned. Those seem to be the things that he went through. Yes? He smoked early on. He said he never inhaled. But no, yeah, who said that? But the reason he smoked, I think, was, he said, and I don't remember him growing up smoking. He had stopped. My mom was a smoker. She stopped when I was young. But he either did it for boredom, but being a magician, there were tricks that he could do with cigarettes. So he often might have cigarettes in his pocket. Yep.
How much did your mother take to sleep?
So that was a great question, and thank you for asking that. Dad and my mother were joined at the hip in a lot of ways. Dad was doing his work, and my mom supported him in all the other things. She was a consummate housewife, and what would happen is whenever they got galleys for one of his books, I remember that Mom and Dad would be sitting in the living room, and they would read out loud across 2 copies, and between the 2 of them, they would look to spot any errors or anything. So it was kind of making sure that both of them were on the same page with that. Where someone, yes? So I'm guessing he woke up about 8:30. I'm going to go to way in the back and then you, yes? Oh, yes, he would teach me magic tricks, and close-up magic was his thing. I had one of the earlier photos, I think, of what was in his pocket. And so, for example, with close-up, his close-up magic, if you were having dinner with him and it was someone new, before you knew it, he'd be folding a napkin and doing something like this, and he'd take the napkin and he'd go, "Oh, I'm a bunny rabbit." So, and other close-up magic, that was the sort of things. And we did share a love for magic, and often when we'd go into the city, we'd stop by Lou Tannen's magic store or Al Falasso's. Yes?
One more question.
Okay. Great question. He met her probably right around 1951. There's a picture of my mom. I'm the one with the tie and shorts. And I think they dated for 2 or 3 years. I think they were married in 1954. I was born in 1955. I'll close with one last photo. This is the photo of Dad. We think at one point he wanted to become a professional magician. So this looks like a really interesting headshot I tried the doctor, a headshot. That's my son, William. And when I look at that, I see so much of my dad in my son, William. So with that, I got to stop.
Thank you very much.
But I'm
One
happy to
more
talk
time.
with you about other
Thank you,
things,
James
so.
Gardner.